Hey everyone, this is Everyday Commentary. I'm doing a video review. It's been a while, so I thought I'd do a video review. Plus, the thing that I'm reviewing is pretty darn cool. This here is the production Dauntless from Triple Aught Design gear. It is the Mark II version, which means that instead of having a titanium lock side and a titanium front side, it has a titanium lock side and then really sort of gorgeous, polished G10. It is a large blade. It runs about, the blade is almost exactly 3.5 inches. The cutting edge is a little shorter because of the choil. So there is and then on top is a small Sebenza. You can see that the small Sebenza is significantly smaller. I mean, we can line up the pivots, and the Sebenza is significantly smaller. This is a big knife. I mean, there's no two ways about it. This is a big, heavy-duty knife. It is a production run of a knife that Patrick Ma designed, I believe the owner of Triple Aught Design. He designed the knife, and then he handed it out to a series of custom makers. And for the past 5 or so years, they've been making their own renditions of this knife. You know, the general overall design traits. You know, the fullers, the grooves, and then the shape of the blade. That kind of stuff stays the same. The Triple Aught Design logo is usually incorporated. But this is a design that is entirely his, and it was put through the production process. There's a lot of speculation online about who the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer, is, but whoever it was, they did one hell of a job, because I'm going to tell you, going through this and having this knife for almost a month now, I have found no flaws on it whatsoever. I mean, if you look how tightly cut the lock bar is. So the bottom, and I use this Sebenza as a pointer, the bottom portion of the lock bar is, you know, it is significantly thinner than the Sebenza, and then right here, that portion, the portion that actually comes in contact with the blade, is even more tightly cut. I mean, I've never seen a lock bar like, look, this is the lock bar on the Sebenza, and it is more spacious than the one on the Dauntless. If you look, this is a really thick, massive blade. I mean, there it is up next to the small Sebenza. The thumb studs are pretty beefy, as you can see. They're significantly larger than the Sebenza thumb studs. And the overall profile of the knife is different. Instead of the clip point blade on the Sebenza, you have a pretty distinctive and really quite elegant spear point blade on this. This knife reminds me in a lot of ways of a Strider. It has the look and the ruggedness of a Strider, and something like the fit and finish of a Sebenza. And I say something like because I'm not exactly sure which knife is better made. This knife is really, really well made. The fit and finish is just excellent, but look at the centering on this blade. It's just incredible. It's just incredible. And it really packs in a lot of blade, both lengthwise and widthwise, into a handle that's pretty small. There you can see the pocket clip, the over-the-top pocket clip, which I actually like. But before we do that, before I ramble on and spend 5 minutes just pointing out nice things about the blade, well, this is 4 minutes, let me introduce how I do this. So if you've seen any of my other videos, it's pretty simple. I have 10 categories, and the knife or the product can get a 0, a 1, or a 2 in each of the categories. If it gets a 0, that means it failed. If it gets a 1, it means it worked. If it gets a 2, it means it worked really well. So it's a scale of 0 to 20, and 20 being the best, 20 being the highest score you can get. And then the 10 characteristics, I'm going to go through them one at a time. They're design, fit and finish, grip, meaning how it feels in your hand, carry, how it feels in your pocket, the blade steel, the blade shape, the grind, the deployment method, how you get it open, the retention method, how you keep it on you, and then the lock. And so I'm going to go through each one of those categories for this knife and tell you what I got when I finished testing in terms of scoring. For testing, I did a couple of things. I used it down in the workshop, my workshop that I'm in right now. I used it to cut some rope. I used it to cut down quite a few cardboard boxes from the post-Christmas shipping madness. And I used it, around the house doing everyday chores. And then after that, I went and did some pretty serious cutting. I mean, you can see the blade. This is not a pristine blade anymore, but it's still it's still sharp. It's got some love marks on it. And I used that to cut up some wood in my workshop. It was mainly pine, but it was kiln dried pine, and it's pretty tough. I mean, it's not oak. I wouldn't say that it was oak. I wouldn't say that it was anything harder than pine, but it definitely put some torque on this handle, and the knife just laughed it off. So I feel confident that the testing that I did is pretty similar to what you will use this knife for, and I don't think that people will abuse this knife because it's pretty expensive. This is a $300 blade, but at the same time, I think you could probably take it if you really needed to do it. By the way, there's that. It is a gorgeous satin finish pivot. The whole knife is bead blasted. The handles are bead blasted. The blade is bead blasted, and then there's this smooth matte finish on the G10, and then the one piece of bling is this really gorgeous pivot. So let's get into it. The design, what this knife looks like on paper, and if you know anything about Tad gear, they really do have quite the design chops. There is an aesthetic, a look that accompanies most Tad gear stuff, and it is sort of muted and rugged looking, and yet at the same time there's a degree of refinement to it. Like, for example, if you look at the handle scales here, these are really nice rounded over handle scales. These aren't like painful to grip. They are really quite nice in the hand. They fit nice in the hand. There's no real hot spots. And the fullers, even though the fullers are there probably primarily for look, they do give you quite a bit of traction this way. I mean, your fingers kind of lock in there, and the little pads on your fingers go in. Here, I'll show you if I can. So you can see my fingers kind of going into the fullers, and they kind of lock in. So, this is definitely a knife that has an aesthetic sense about it. It's not as plain Jane as the Sebenza is, but at the same time, every single one of these aesthetic touches, the bead blasted finish, the rounded over handle scales, the matte finish on the G10, the fuller, all of those things work in service to performance. They make the knife better, and they make the knife better looking. So in the sense of what is it like on paper, I really, really do like this design. I think it's an excellent design. It's beautiful. It has a rugged utilitarian beauty to it, and at the same time, it's not so overly designed as to look weird. It doesn't look like this was taken from the set of a Star Trek show. This looks like a knife you could carry in your pocket. It's just a really good looking knife. And I think that there's a place where tactical knives and gentlemen's carry knives or traditional knives kind of merge, and sometimes those knives come off as bland, sometimes they come off as ugly, and for whatever reason I find that this knife is right in the middle. It has enough tactical features, or whatever that means. It has enough hard use features to make it useful, but it's also a pretty good looking knife. So in terms of design, I gave it a 2 out of 2. In terms of fit and finish, I think you're probably going to guess I gave this a 2 out of 2 as well. I mean, if you look at that, the lockup on the lock bar is pretty darn good. I mean, it's halfway there. Now, I did loosen the pivot a little bit. It came really, really tight. But I loosened the pivot a little bit so that I could do this. And that is flip it open with really no hand motion whatsoever. And I will tell you this, I have not recorded this video and then redone it. That was the first take, and I was able to get it open with my hands behind the camera because this knife is smooth. It comes out smooth, it closes smooth, but it's not so loose that it flops around when it's in the in between stages, between the detent close in the handle and the locked open position. As I told you, the handles are rounded over, and they're rounded over really nicely. The lock bar is very nice and tight to the body. It's not something that feels loose or floppy. It doesn't have any sort of lock bar wiggle when it's in place, like some of the other lock bar frame lock knives, the production frame lock knives, like the original AC Russell Asias had some lock bar wiggle. The pocket clip is nicely made, and then I've already pointed this out, but these pivots, they are like little jewels, and I love the way they look. So everything is done really well. The hex or the Torx bits They are flush to the body, so you can't see them when you turn the knife to the side. I will note that one thing that the Sebenza does that this knife didn't do is every single bolt on the Sebenza uses the same driver. And that is not the case here. Now, I mention that because I actually like this design a little better, because the flathead here allows you to do a lot of field service. I doubt that people really want to take this knife apart outdoors, running around, going on a hike, or God forbid if you're in a combat zone or something. But if you need to, I have found that of the places where you need adjustment, it's a pivot. And the pivot has a nice flathead. So I tried, and you can't quite fit a dime in there, and you definitely can't fit a penny in there. But there are a lot of objects that will fit in there and allow you to play around with the pivot and tighten it or loosen it as you see fit. I don't think that you need to. Out of the box, it was pretty nice and tight. I like mine a little looser, but even when they're loose, I've loosened this significantly, and there's not much blade play at all here. I mean, I'm holding way out at the tip, and I'm getting very little blade play, and that's in the lock position after I've loosened it, so I can open it like that. Again, this thing just fires crazy, super fast. 2 on the fit and finish. In terms of grip, as I said before, I think this is a knife that is heavily influenced by Strider, the spear point tip, and then the significant finger choil. And here is a knife that has a great finger choil. You'll see in the written review, I have a picture of the paramilitary 2's choil. And what happens on the paramilitary 2 choil is right here on the paramilitary 2 choil, there is a little lip, and it's basically a place where the jimping stops and then the knife blade starts up again. So there's like a gap. Because of that lip, you can't sharpen right up to the edge. But with this knife, you can sharpen right up to the edge. So the choil is actually really well done because it takes up as little real estate as possible. Your finger can go right here, and you're fine. It's not like the beard on the axe beard look on the Leaf Storm, the Spyderco Leaf Storm. This is a place where your fingers are designed to go, and it's pretty comfortable. I use this, and like I said, I was cutting up some pine. We did some remodeling on the house, and we had some pine boards sitting around that were going to go to the dump, and so I decided to try to take a hack at them, and I put a lot of pressure on this knife, and I put my finger right there, and because of the way that the grind is done, there's no real worry about your finger getting poked by the end of this blade. The choil is perfectly cut here. And additionally, it's a finger choil on the blade and then another little choil on the handle, and it gives you an unparalleled amount of control. I mean, I've just never had a knife this big that feels this comfortable in the hand. One of the tasks that I did that was kind of funny was I was at work, and I had brought this knife just to play with it and have it in my pocket and see what it's like. And I had to make something out of paper, and so I was making copies, and I wanted to cut out a slim portion of paper, and I was like, you know what, let me see if I can do this. This is definitely not a task this knife is designed to do. It's such a fine detail work type task, but with the jimping on the top, which is really well cut and purposeful, and the 2 choils, I was able to get quite a bit of control. I even gave it a little bit of a scalpel type action in it, and it did really, really well. I was shocked at how good this tip was. Another thing that adds to the grip, in addition to the fullers that I had mentioned before, there's jimping here in the body, the choil on the body, that allows you to disengage the lock, but it also helps lock in your finger when you're using it like this. I found that it's equally comfortable this way as well as this way. They did a good job here because the pocket clip does stand off from the body a little, and that's one thing that people complained about, and I'll get to it in a second. But if you have your finger like this, the pocket clip is covered up by the swell in your hand. There's a place where your palm kind of arches over the knife, and it goes in your hand that way. But if you have your hand there, and you have medium-sized hands, which is what I do, the larger, wider portion of the pocket clip misses your hand. So in both instances, the pocket clip is not a problem for me when I'm holding the knife. I have noticed that if you hold it like this, if you do like the ice pick grip, the pocket clip again misses your hand all the way. Like I put my thumb there and give it a good crank. Finally, there's a geared backspacer, and that gives you a little bit of extra grip. As you can see, it just stands off just a tiny bit from the rest of the knife. And it does work. It's pretty cool looking, and it also works. Another sign that this knife is a great knife. In terms of carry, the over-the-top pocket clip buries the knife pretty deeply into your pocket. But here's the thing that's kind of strange. So it's not as slim as the Sebenza, because the Sebenza is a really slim knife. I mean, it's slim. But this knife, the small Sebenza, is significantly smaller than this. Compare this knife to another small knife. Compare this knife to the mini grip. And you'll see that even though the mini grip is smaller even than the Sebenza, it's about as wide, or it's about as thick, maybe a little thicker than the Dauntless, the production Dauntless. I mean, the production Dauntless is one of those knives that just, for whatever reason, it sort of disappears in your pocket. Even though it's a big knife, even though it's not, the sveltest knife, it is pretty heavy, and the specs are in my review. In the written review, it does disappear quite nicely in your pocket. The surfaces, even though they have texture this way, the fullers grip your hands this way, they're really good. They don't grip your pants that much at all here, and then the smooth side allows you to pull it out and put it in pretty easily. I've had no problems whatsoever getting this knife in and out. It stays in when I need it to stay in, and it comes out when I need it to come out. I really like it, and so for grip and carry, I give it 2 out of 2. The steel is S30V steel, and my only ding here, and it's just a small one, is that the knife does use bead blasting. I'd prefer a stonewash finish. Bead blasting just has a tendency to make things look dirty, and it does in some instances attract rust, although that's not happened in this case. It has attracted no rust at all. The S30V steel here is really great steel. I mean, I've used this knife pretty significantly, and it is still, I wouldn't say it's razor sharp, but I think it's definitely sharp enough to if I got a good angle on it, I can cut this paper with the you can still see that it has a pretty good edge on it, even though I've used this pretty extensively and haven't sharpened it. So on the steel, I mean, S30V steel is a little old, but it's still one of my favorites. Probably my favorite overall steel in terms of balance between, edge holding, which is hardness, lack of chipping, which is toughness, and then appearance, corrosion resistance. It's still a pretty darn good all-around steel. I gave it 2 out of 2 in steel. In blade shape, this is a pretty simple blade shape. It is a spear point blade with a nice swedge, and it has a good choil. I really like this blade shape. It works well. It's got enough belly that you can do, roll cuts with it, but it doesn't have any funky recurve to it. It has a nice flat portion that you can use to cut stuff as well. The choil works, and then the swedge does a really good job. I mean, this is a pretty thick bar of steel, and the swedge does a good job of carrying that thickness all the way. I mean, you can see right there. There's like a point right about there where the thickness of the steel starts to diminish. So you have all of the thickness of the steel on probably 7/8 of the way down the blade, and then it's this last half inch that you lose the thickness to get to the tip. And I found this tip to be really, really durable, which is a surprising thing because it is sharp and pointy. If you compare it to the tip on the this is the mini grip. You compare it to the tip on the mini grip, I found that this is significantly more acute, and yet I've had no issues, and I think it's because of this really well done swedge. So in blade shape, I give it a 2 out of 2. And grind, this is a flat grind. It's a halfway flat grind here. But the real trick here is the way in which the grind sort of blends into the choil to give you this nice space for your finger to go. The secondary or cutting bevel is really nice. It's quite wide, and you can see it there. Compare that to the cutting bevel on the Benchmade mini grip. It's about twice as thick. That big fat portion of the blade, that shiny portion of the blade, is the place where all the work is done, and you can actually do some pretty good cutting, and it is relatively easy to strop, although I haven't sharpened it. I would imagine that given its width, it's easy to sharpen, with the caveat that S30V can sometimes be difficult to sharpen because it's hard. Really, really great great grind here. I mean, it's not complex enough to be weird, but it's complex in the sense that there are multiple facets, and each one of them has some purpose that doesn't, gunk up the function or sharpening of the knife. And so I gave it a 2 out of 2 in grind. In terms of deployment, I think you've already seen this, but I'll show you again, 'cause it's awesome. I can't describe how nice the pivot is in words, really. I mean, here's what I'll say. It's a knife that you can deploy very quickly using, like a coin flip method on your thumb. So your thumb goes in there, and then pop it open like you would when you flip a coin. And it just comes open really fast. You can also do it so you can roll it open. And you can use the thumb pad method where you get a little bit of thumb pad in there. But that requires a little bit of a wrist flick. Like I said, I loved the deployment on this knife. The pivot is silky smooth. It was a little tight when I got it. Not so tight that you couldn't flick it open with wrist action, but I wanted it to be able to go open with nothing, and that's what I can do now. The thumb studs, they are significantly larger than the thumb studs on the Sebenza. They are nicely radiused. They have a little terracing to them. And instead of the point on the Sebenza, which I have found to be quite annoying, it's flat on top. You can see the flat point right there. And that really does make a difference. It doesn't dig into the fat of your thumb at all if you use that method. And it doesn't really scrape up your nail. I mean, I have pretty short fingernails, so it doesn't really matter, but it really does work. And so even though it's a thumb stud, and I typically don't like thumb studs, this is a really well designed one. This is one that I enjoy using. So I give it a 2 out of 2 in deployment. In terms of retention, how you hold it, this is one thing that people have talked about. So if you look at the clip, if you see the clip, you can tell that it kind of is deeper than or it sticks out more than the pocket clip on, say, the mini grip. And so people have said that this is prone to snagging. Well, I've worn this knife for quite a while. I wore it in my Tad Gear covert pants, which are awesome. And it never snagged on anything. As you can see, it's in really quite good shape. There isn't any major dings to it. There's a little wear on the sides, but that's normal. I mean, this knife is just a good knife, and the pocket clip is not a problem. It does carry really deep in the pocket. I mean, we're talking, super deep. We're like looking at like that much stuff sticking out when you put it in your pocket. It's a great tiny little knife, tiny little pocket clip when it's in your pocket. And it's matte finish, so it doesn't attract a whole lot of attention. And the screws are easy to get to because they drilled them out. Overall, I like the simple pocket clip design. I will note that it is a little wiggly, but that's just because it's a sort of tensioned piece of steel. It's not held in place like a normal pocket clip. It's held in place by tension on the bend as opposed to the screws pushing it down. So it's to be expected, and it's not a big deal. In terms of lock, as you can tell, it's a frame lock, and it's a frame lock that really does work. The lockup is on this model, which I've used pretty extensively, is pretty late or pretty early. It's about halfway, and if you notice, the lock bar face is not just ramped, but it's also slightly radiused, and that means that it'll have a harder time as the lock goes from one side to the other. It'll have a harder time. It'll lock it even tighter as it wears. I really like the lock on this knife. I mean, it's really sturdy. There's no wiggle, and yet it's easy to disengage. Overall, the 2 out of 2 on the lock, and overall, this is a great knife. I found no flaws with it. I used it for a month. I did, medium duty tasks. I did a couple hard use tasks. I did tasks that you'll do every day with it. If you're carrying this knife for everyday carry, it is a great knife. My only caveat, and this is something that I have to go back to because it's personal preference. I like smaller knives. This knife at 3.5 inches is probably bigger than I would carry, although it's probably my favorite 3.5 inch knife that I've ever used because it carries much smaller than the blade seems to be. So it's a big knife, but if you're looking for a big knife and you want to drop some dough, and they're available because these knives are incredibly hard to find even on eBay, $300 is easily worth it. The fit and finish is definitely on par with the Sebenza. The overall design is really great. The aesthetics are great. The functionality is insane. I mean, it just cuts and cuts and cuts and cuts. It's a great knife. I have nothing bad to say about this knife. So I'm going to give it a 20 out of 20, and you can see the written review on everydaycommentary.com. Thanks.